Marco Rubio announced he's running for president. Over the weekend, Hillary Clinton became the first Democrat, maybe even the only Democrat, to throw her name into the ring for 2016 by releasing this video officially kicking off her campaign. Take a look.
Americans have fought their way back from tough economic times, but the deck is still stacked in favor of those at the top. Everyday Americans need a champion, and I want to be that champion. So you can do more than just get by. You can get ahead and stay ahead, because when families are strong, America is strong. So I'm hitting the road to earn your vote, because it's your time, and I hope you'll join me on this journey.
All right, as we continue with Senator Marco Rubio, you know, very interesting. You said yesterday, a leader from yesterday to take us back to yesterday. Yesterday's over, and we're never going back. Laying out a very distinct difference already between you and maybe the...
We should be very proud of our history as a country, but we've always been about the future. And the 21st century is a dramatically different time than the 20th century. It's developing faster. The challenges are different. The global challenges are different. And so while we always want to be proud of our past, there's work that needs to be done. There's work that we need to do now to fully capitalize on the opportunity of the future, and we need leaders that understand that. And I think oftentimes when you see some of the policies being proposed out there by different people, they're policies that don't work anymore. Some of them never worked. They work even worse now.
How closely do you see her policies to President Obama's policies?
Well, in many respects, I think it's going to be a continuation, primarily because she was a member of his administration. For example, on foreign policy, she was the architect of his foreign policy. So you have to assume that she's going to continue his trajectory in terms of foreign policy decisions. And it's been a disaster for America so far.
A recent poll comes out and shows that the vast majority in swing states, 3 of them, that they don't view Hillary as honest and trustworthy. Is that a hard perception to overcome? I would think it is.
It is. And part of it, I think, is of a long history of things that have come out of both her husband's administration, her time at the Secretary of State. And I think part of it is some of these recent revelations that we've read. And I think the biggest issue we've missed in regards to her emails and so forth is that by using a private server, potentially sensitive American diplomatic conversations, not classified but sensitive, could have been exposed to a hacker or someone gaining access to it. But look, I think at the core of this campaign is going to be the fundamental question: what kind of country do we want to be in the 21st century, and who has the best ideas and the best proposals to get us to the right place?
Let's talk about the server, though, because she destroyed the server. She made the sole decision independently.
Well, that's a bizarre activity. I mean, most people don't go around destroying their server.
I don't know anybody that has.
And so it just adds more suspicion and more questions. But I think this is part of a longer pattern that we've seen in the past from them. But ultimately, this election is going to be about the future of America and about who's got the best agenda to move the country forward in the 21st century.
One big issue for me, and it has come up now, and more people are talking about it, she says is a time for a woman to be president. And then we find out the Clinton Foundation, it's the Bill Hillary Chelsea Clinton Foundation, took all this money from countries that have atrocious rights, human rights records for women, for gays and lesbians, etc. Right. You see hypocrisy there?
Yeah, I think you could certainly make that case very strongly. And again, look, they're out there raising money for their foundation. When you re-enter public service, you're going to have to answer questions about the people that gave you money, and more importantly, whether those donations were intended to influence public policy making, whether it's at her time as Secretary of State or later on now as a candidate trying to be president. But the point you make is a good one, and that is if you look at what the goals of the foundation was and what the goals of our foreign policy should be in terms of always defending human rights, and then you look to where some of this money is coming from. These are places where women aren't even allowed to drive.
And Saudi Arabia would be one of them.
Sure.
Nor can they be seen in public with a man that they're not related to, nor could you build a Christian church in Saudi Arabia, and she took tens and tens of millions of dollars. Let's look at her time as Secretary of State. Russian reset, then we have Crimea and the Ukraine. After the killing of bin Laden, she said his ideology of hatred is being rejected in the Mideast. That's being wrong on 2 very significant issues.
Yeah, our relations with Russia have definitely been reset, but not in the way that they claimed they would be. What's happened now is that Putin has aggressively moved forward in relitigating, trying to rewrite the end of the Cold War. He claims that any country that was a former Soviet republic And including now, he's saying former Warsaw Pact countries have to be in the Russian sphere of influence.
How do we deal with Putin? How would a President
Well, I think we have to reinvigorate NATO. It begins with a missile defense shield. It continues by reinvigorating NATO and the ability of NATO to change the cost-benefit risk analysis that Putin has to go through before he carries on these attacks. Look, in Ukraine here, over the next few weeks, there is going to be a new offensive. He's going to violate the ceasefire. You're going to see a spring offensive by the separatists backed up by even Russian troops. And then you asked, the other question was about bin Laden and his ideology. Today there are more radical jihadist groups around the world than ever before in more countries. It's no longer just Al-Qaeda. It's now splintered into ISIS, which is present everywhere from Afghanistan to Libya, Iraq, Syria, throughout North Africa.
Let me talk about terror, because I think it is probably the biggest issue that we face. I assume you agree.
Absolutely.
All right, so she once called Assad a reformer. That was in March of 2011. Iraq fell into the hands of ISIS during her tenure as Secretary of State. It began to. Egypt, she supported the former head of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Morsi, gave him F-16s, tanks, and billions of dollars. And in 2012, the Clinton State Department refused to designate Boko Haram a terrorist organization.
Yeah, it's a startling record. On going through each one for a moment, you talk about Egypt for a moment. What happened in Egypt was unfortunate because they pushed them into elections before the country was ready for those elections. We all want to see a democracy emerge anywhere possible, but Egypt wasn't ready for an election at that moment. They pushed them so hard to have an election that at that moment, early after the revolution, the only group capable of winning that election was the Muslim Brotherhood, because they were the only ones that were organized for many years. You touched upon the Assad example. Assad was never a reformer. He's a killer like his father before him. He has an atrocious human rights record. Damascus is basically a waypoint for every terrorist group transiting through the region. They're a proxy and a puppet of the Iranian regime. For them to have called him a reformer is absurd, and I think shows terrible judgment.
Look at the Iranian regime. Look at it closely. They want influence in Iraq. They're getting influence in Syria, and now they're down in Yemen, and they could literally, between the Straits of Hormuz and the straits outside of...
Let me tell you, the Iranian influence is now being felt in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Bahrain.
Yeah.
You're now starting to see that. So you're going to continue to see the spread of Iranian influence in the region. But in addition, we have multiple instances of Iranian sponsorship of terrorism, including an effort to assassinate the Saudi ambassador a couple of years ago in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back. More with Senator Marco Rubio. He announced that he's running for president, and also we're going to be asking some of your questions.